Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for taking the time to be on the call this morning. We know that you received the notification of this funding opportunity on Wednesday, so it was very short turnaround time for you to jump on a call. And so we appreciate you making the time in your schedule to do that. My name is Jenny Proctor. I'm the program manager for the Office of Community Development in Washington County. And for those of you who don't know me and don't know our office, we manage federal funds from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And those programs that we administer are the Community Development Block Grant Program, Home Investment Partnerships Program, and the Emergency Solutions Grant Program. Our office became involved with the Coronavirus Relief Fund funds through being asked to manage a contract with our local community action agency on the rent assistance and utility assistance. And so we've been working closely with them on that effort. And one of the things that happened was that with the utility assistance, which is primarily used by homeowners, the homeowners were not as used to using safety net services, and despite a lot of effort to get the funds out the door, it looked like they were going to be underutilized. So we have approximately 2 million to 2.5 million. And so we wanted to make sure those funds were utilized. And so we pivoted very quickly to put out this program design. So just kind of an acknowledgement right off the bat that we realize it's a very tight timeline. But the effort was to make sure that we were able to utilize the money and continuing to help with housing stability and stability of our multifamily properties. So before we get into the program, I wanted to make sure that I introduce staff and partners who were integral in this effort and on this call today. And Lauren already introduced herself, which she'll be managing the chat room, the Q&A, and any raised hands. So we want to be able to answer your questions in the context of the presentation, as opposed to waiting to the end and getting all the questions then. So Lauren and I have talked. She should feel free to stop me at any point so that your questions can be answered. Brian Johnson is our management analyst, and he will be talking to you towards the end of the presentation about the county's Procure Now system. And if you've utilized that system or perhaps even a similar system, if you choose not to stay for that, that's fine. Feel free to drop off at that point. But for people who haven't used that system before, it might be a really good extra couple of minutes to walk through that system with Brian so he can give you the context or orient you to that section. Andre Tremolay is our housing and community development specialist, and she has been instrumental in helping with the program design. And then Sheila Greenlaw-Fink is the executive director for the Community Housing Fund out here in Washington County, and she also has been instrumental in the program design. So if there's questions that I can't answer, or if there are questions that Andre or Sheila want to add nuance to, both of them should feel free to jump in at any point as well. We want to make sure that you have as much information about this effort as possible so that you can turn around and put an application together. Let's see, just make sure that I've covered everything. If there are any questions that we can't answer now, then we will circle back and work with Susie Fulcher, who is the manager of the Support Services Purchasing Division, and who was instrumental in helping us get this application system up so quickly. So we hugely deserve, she hugely deserves huge thanks for the effort that she put into getting this up and running. So we would circle back to Susie to figure out how to get your question into Procure Now so everybody has the benefit of the answer to that question. So just know that we'll take a list of any questions we don't answer today and make sure that we are able to circle back to you. So now I'm going to jump into the slideshow presentation, and we'll walk through that. And again, please feel free to ask questions along the way, and Lauren will stop me. The first, we've introduced staff and partners. We will review the program description, with which most of you have read already. So but we'll talk about it, step through, and you can ask any questions about it. We will walk through the application questions and review the required documents. That's a really critical piece in this. And then Brian will do the introduction to Procure Now. And then there will be an opportunity for final Q&As, so that hopefully you feel like you're ready to jump off and prepare an application. So the purpose of the funding is that we are offering an expedited application process to assist owners of multifamily affordable rental housing projects that are located in Washington County that have been impacted by the loss of rental revenue associated with the COVID pandemic.
Hey,
so
Jenny,
the purpose of the
do you want to share your screen?
oh yeah, slightly important aspect. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, let's see. There we go. Okay, Lauren, would you tell me if and when you see it?
Yes, I see it. And also, I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone. Well, I don't want to mute people on the phone if they have a question, so never mind.
Okay.
If you have background noise, try to mute yourself.
Okay, thank you for stopping me, Lauren. And so you see it now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. So that's the agenda I just walked through. Purpose of the funding. So the purpose is threefold: to provide relief to landlords, to provide relief to the tenants who've not been able to fulfill their rent obligations, and then to stabilize subsidized housing projects so that they can continue to serve in the mission of providing quality housing.
And Jenny, we do have a clarifying question here in the chat. This is affordable only relief, correct?
Yes, so subsidized, regulated, affordable housing properties. And one of the required documents is that you provide a covenant, a declaration of restricted covenants that shows that there's an affordability period tied to the property. So under eligible properties, so properties that are located in Washington County, properties that consist of between 5 and 300 units. They have deed restrictions enforcing an affordability period of 15 years or more, and that can demonstrate a net loss in rental income due to the COVID pandemic between the time period of March 1st through December 30th, once any other assistance that you might have received has been applied to offset the loss. Eligible applicants are nonprofits, for-profit entities, and the Housing Authority of Washington County, and that would be for certain properties. If the property owner is a limited partnership, the applicant must be the managing general partner or equivalent. In the case that the Housing Authority may be a special limited partner for the purposes of tax exemption only, the Housing Authority may not be the applicant. That doesn't mean that that property couldn't still apply, but they would have to apply under a different ownership entity. You may submit applications for multiple properties, but it's one property per application. So if you wanted to submit applications for 5 properties, you would have 5 separate applications. The priorities for properties serving the following populations disproportionately impacted by inequities exacerbated by COVID-19 are the prioritization. Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and people of color, and families with children. The funds received through this program must be applied towards back due rent, and the payments must be credited to the accounts of the tenants with rent in arrears. So the owner will be required to demonstrate within 30 days of payment that the funds were applied towards back rent and that the tenant accounts were credited and that the tenants were notified of that credit. There is also under this opportunity to be reimbursed for any modifications related to COVID-19 and occurring before that same time period of March 1st through December 30th. So they may receive secondary consideration if sufficient funds are available. So those requests must be documented, and decisions regarding the awards for modifications will be made at the sole discretion of the county, and they're dependent upon eligibility and funding availability. So an example might be that in your property, the property management office needed to be modified to ensure that there is a plexiglass front cover at the front desk, and the cost of that is attributed to COVID-19 and therefore would be an eligible modification. So those kinds of costs that the property might have incurred during that time period would be eligible for reimbursement. The maximum award for the rental economic relief per project is up to $300,000. We
had a letter we put out saying if you're interested in getting funding for your past due balance, please call the office and set up a time to meet with us, and we'll work with you.
So I wasn't sure if that was a question, but it sounds like
a good idea, huh? Because we're just offering help. I don't know why that would hurt anything.
Lauren, I don't know if there's a way to mute that, but
no, I'm on my cell phone, which is plugged into my charger, and I have my mask on, of course.
I think I'm gonna go ahead and
just
mute her.
muffled.
Okay,
sorry about that.
That's okay. The maximum award is $300,000 per project. We know there are a lot of properties that won't need the full 300. They'll come in at far less than that amount. That's just the maximum available, or the maximum available per project. And we would anticipate probably seeing that amount for the larger size projects. If the program is oversubscribed, the maximum award per applicant for all the projects that they submit for would be $500,000. These are grant funds, but there are expectations to be met, and you will be required to certify acceptance of those requirements. And we will go over the list of certifications towards the end of the presentation. The schedule that we have for this opportunity is you have the Zoom meeting today. The last day to submit any questions is next Wednesday, the 16th by 5 o'clock. All of your questions need to be submitted through the Procure Now system. And then that way we are able to respond to the question and everybody gets the benefit of that piece of information. So please just remember to submit all questions from this point forward through the Procure Now system. The applications are due by next Friday, December 18th by 5 o'clock. And again, we recognize that's a really tight timeline, and we just hope that you're able to work within that. The notifications of award will be by December 30th. And so that is the last day under the Coronavirus Relief Fund program that those kinds of decisions can be made. So that's why it's a very quick timeline, is we have to meet that date. The awards will be made in January, and that will allow us to kind of complete the process. But the award notifications will be made by December 30th.
Jenny, it looks like Andre has her hand up.
Yeah.
Jenny, I just wanted to note that we had a question in chat that maybe it might be useful to address now. And
Okay.
the question asks, affordable only relief.
We actually, Jenny reviewed that one already.
I think there are two layers there. One layer is whether or not the property is affordable, right? Another, and then within the property, there can be a variety of incomes. Some people then might be not living not in subsidized units. For example, home assisted units, not all of them are, not every unit in a home assisted project is subsidized. So anyway, I just thought we might kind of dive into that a little bit deeper.
Yeah, so the intention is that if the property itself has a covenant, affordability covenant with affordability periods of greater than 15 years, that would be an eligible property. And we are not looking at the individual income of the tenants. We are qualifying the COVID impact on the property itself and the impact to the community. So the intent is to help the tenants, definitely, but the intent is to try to ensure the stability of the overall property so that it does not fail, obviously to the extent that we can, because we're looking at March through December only. So that's really what we're doing. We're not adjusting your request by the number of units that are under 80% MFI. Andre, do you feel that that gets at the question?
I think that's a great clarification. Thanks, Jenny.
Okay. Okay, so just to pause for a moment and see if there are any other questions that may have come up. And I'll just wait a couple seconds. Okay. Okay, so now we are just stepping through.
Sorry, Jenny, we did just get one right after. Do air purifiers count as modifications like the plexiglass and other things that you had mentioned?
Air modifications, so
air purifiers.
Air purifiers. So is it the purchase of equipment, or is it cost of equipment and cost of installation?
Charlene, I was just going to say, Charlene, if you want to jump on and clarify your question.
Yeah, so just for like the purchase of all the equipment, because we had to make a few COVID related expenses, including like the plexiglass install for some of our offices. So we also just recently purchased those floor labels for like distancing, air purifiers, other like COVID related expenses. So I was just wondering if those counted as well.
Yeah, I think it's possible, but I think I might like to take that question back and just be sure, that I'm not thinking about this from my federal perspective and CDBG and home and the costs of the purchase of equipment, the eligibility of the purchase of equipment. So let me take that question back, and then we'll figure out how to respond via the Procure Now system.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you for asking that. Okay, so we will step through the application, and again, Brian will be going through the Procure Now system, how to navigate in it. These slides are really just to touch on some of the questions that are asked in the application. So you will be asked some organization information, property information. All of that is, I think, pretty straightforward to you all. Contact information. Please make sure that the person who is listed on the application as the contact with their phone number and their email is someone that will be available to respond to questions between December 18th and December 30th. Because if we need to reach you, we're going to need to reach you right away. So we would ask that that person be really available and not planning to be taking time off the last 2 weeks of the month. Portfolio information, we would like to know the percentage of units in your portfolio that are located in Washington County. And there's a note there that says it must correspond to information on the applicant worksheet. So we'll be looking at the application worksheet a little bit later, but basically there's a question that says, you know, how many units does your organization own, and how many are located specifically in Washington County? Name of property, address of property, number of units in property, and was your project funded at any time with home program assistance from Washington County, and that still has an active affordability period? So the reason we've asked that question is, if you've received a home program loan from us in the past, then we have your declaration of restrictive covenants on file. We know what your affordability period is and that you're still in it. If you had a loan with us from the home program 25 years ago and it has expired, then we would need to see whatever the existing covenant is on the property that holds you to an affordability period. And there is a question in the rating about whether your project is a home project. So there are points associated with having a currently funded home project. The funding request questions. You will be asked what your funding request is for the rental economic relief. And so that number must correspond to the request on the application worksheet, which again, we'll be looking at. Will the amount you are requesting bring tenant accounts fully current through December 30th? How will you document in your accounting system and rent rolls that the funds received are credited to past due rent from tenants, thus relieving tenants of the obligation to pay that amount themselves? And then relative to COVID-related modification, the total documented modification expenditures that are directly related to the pandemic. And again, that must correspond to the request on the application worksheet. We talked about having priority populations in this funding opportunity. So you will be asked what percentage of households who provided racial or ethnic information identified the head of households as being Black, Indigenous, Latinx, a person of color, or a person of multiple races. And that again must correspond to the information on the application worksheet. I wanted to call out on that it's the percentage of households who provided racial and ethnic information. So we've heard from our affordable housing properties that not everybody responds to that question. And so we're not asking you just across the number of units that you have, what are the numbers? We're saying of the number of people who responded to that question, provide information on demographics. And the reason for that was to not penalize you if you didn't have information for some units. What percentage of households have children under the age of 18? Again, that needs to correspond to the worksheet. So you can understand that finding that worksheet in Procure Now is a critical piece, because that's a critical piece of your documentation. There are 4 questions that are narrative based. So how has the pandemic affected your residents at the property? Besides the loss of rental income, how else has the pandemic affected your management of this project? So you can see from that question, we're really looking at this at the project level or property level. Describe the kinds of impacts: deferred maintenance, increase in demand of services on your property, on your staff, increased staffing costs, any kind of property damage, any impacts to the property itself. Please describe in a narrative format. What is your financial outlook for the next 30 to 90 days? What additional resources do you have to support your needs? Cash reserves, endowment, loans, federal or state relief? And then what is the impact to your clients or your community if this financial need is not met? You can see by the word limits that we're not asking for pages of information. It's a pretty brief description of need. Okay, so then we are on the slide for required documents. And this is a pretty important piece of the application process, because we really are asking for you to document what you're telling us. So we would like you to submit a copy of the completed application worksheet, and there are 2 tabs. So again, Brian Johnson will, well, actually, no, I'm doing that part. I will show you at the end of this presentation that worksheet, what it looks like, and the questions that are being asked. We're asking that you label some of these documents in a consistent way, so that we're not looking at your documents and trying to figure out which document is addressing what question. So we're asking you to label that application worksheet. We're asking you to submit 2 types of supporting documentation. And the reason for 2 types is for validation of data. So that might be from your rent roll, accounts receivable, or other system generated reports that document rent in arrears for the time period of March 1st through December 30th. And you may estimate rental arrears for the month of December. So we know that not everybody may have completed reports for December, so it is okay to estimate. What we're asking you on this documentation is that you highlight or circle the totals in the documentation that correspond to line 16 of the worksheet. And really why we're asking for that is that those reports are probably complicated. They might in some cases be very long. So we're asking you to just help us find the number in your document that calls out what we're asking for. Either do it with a highlight, circle it, show us any calculations that you had to make on that, but really help us find that number so we're not having to dig. It's compressed on your end to get the application in. It's also really compressed on our end to get the applications reviewed by December 30th. So you would really be helping us out. Let's see. If payments are anticipated from any other sources to offset rental arrearages, for example, if you applied to Oregon Housing and Community Services for a similar loan and you've been notified you will get that loan, you want to make sure that that amount is applied to rental arrearages first. And then what we would be making up is the difference. We would like you to submit a current rent roll or other documentation that shows unit demographics, meaning the demographics on race and ethnicity of head of household, and the number of children under the age of 18 in each unit. We would like you to submit the summary table 2 found on the summary tab of the application worksheet that summarizes the modification expenditures. So that's just the second tab of that worksheet where we're asking you, perhaps you have 5 invoices for modifications. We're asking you to list those separately and come to a total. If the property was not funded by Washington County's Home Investment Partnerships Program, then we'd like you to provide a deed restriction or other legal document that indicates the period of affordability. And you will label that affordability period. We'd like you to complete a W-9. That helps us make sure that if you're awarded funds, we have the ability to get the payment to you. And we'd like you to label that W-9. There is a certification form that will need to be signed, and we'd like you to label that certification. And again, we will look at that form before we're done today. And then document of ownership of the property. So that just allows us to kind of match up that the entity applying for the funds is the owner of the property. That's a lot of information, so I'm just going to pause for a moment and see if there are any questions on that.
I have a question. If, in terms of affordability, does Section 8 count as affordability or no?
Are you talking about a project that is 100% funded by project-based Section 8?
No, just a few of the units.
No, no, it would be more and Sheila and Andre, feel free to correct me if you think I'm wrong, but we're looking at affordability periods established in a covenant on the land, and usually that's because you have tax credits, other funding that came like Section 811, other subsidies that came to purchase or build or rehab the project.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if a question comes to mind a little bit later there, please feel free to bring it up. Okay, we may need to reach out for you for more information. So again, keeping that contact person available would be wonderful. You are required to submit the final application by Friday, December 18th at 5 o'clock. And I believe the procurement system controls that. So I think that the system just closes it out at 5 o'clock. So you wouldn't even be able to submit if it happens after 5 o'clock.
That's correct, Jenny.
Thank you. So there's a possibility that awards may be reduced prior to making the final payment should rental payments by an outside entity, for example, the state of Oregon or community action, be conveyed to the owner applicant between December 1st and January 15th. So we will be verifying that prior to making the final payment. And this is to ensure that any payments that might be coming to you in transit are validated as non-duplicating. So the federal government has a rule about duplication of benefits, and we need to make sure that we verify that before making that final payment. Of course, we would be in communication with you about that. So shouldn't be a surprise if there were a reduced payment. Okay, I think we've talked about all of that. So I'm just going to pause here for questions. Okay. So this is going to take me a little bit. Just I want to pull up the application worksheet. So let me, hopefully I do this right. So I want to just confirm with everybody, do you see an Excel worksheet on your screen? And Lauren, maybe you can tell me.
No. I'm still seeing your PowerPoint. If you go to share your screen, I think it gives you an option to share a specific document. So you might have it only on your PowerPoint and not on your whole desktop.
Okay, let me just try. I stopped sharing and then I started again. So let's see if I can. How about now? Does that work?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Okay. All right, so this is the application worksheet that was referenced all throughout that PowerPoint presentation. And I'm just going to fill in a couple of these fields so you can kind of see how that works. First of all, down at the bottom on the tabs, one tab is labeled application and one tab is labeled supporting data summary. So we'll look at the application tab, and you can see at the top, I just have a fictional property address, the total number of units in the property. So I've listed that at 100, and then the name of the applicant entity. Again, I just made something up. So the total number of units in the organization's portfolio, I'm putting in 500. But the total number of units in the portfolio that are located in Washington County, let's say it's 450, then that's the percentage of units located in Washington County is 90%. So that is a rating point. There's a rating scale in the criteria about that number. So that's why that figure is important for you to put in, because that is used by the rating body in the evaluation. The next section, line 15, is loss of rental income from that time period of March 1st through December 30th. Again, we're asking you to document that from 2 system generated reports. And we're asking you to highlight that figure on the report or circle it and make sure that the report, we can easily find the piece of information, the number, and that it ties to this cell on loss of income. So total rental arrearages for occupied rental units, let's say it's $50,000. Estimated rent arrearages for occupied units in December, let's say that's 5,000. And anticipated payments to offset rent arrearages, let's say you're receiving $10,000 from the state of Oregon. Then the maximum funding request for the rental income loss is $45,000. Then we're asking you, the funding request for the rental income loss is $45,000. When we come down to the section on COVID-related expenditures, let's say you have $10,000 in COVID-related expenditures, less payments to offset those, then the maximum eligible modification expenditures is $8,000. You'll see that in the notes column, It's asking you to support your request with documentation. Okay, now coming down to the priority populations, the total households in the project currently. Well, we said there were, let me just go back up. We said there were 100 units in this property. So total households in the property is 100. The number of heads of household who provided race and ethnicity information, let's say that's 75. The number of heads of household who identified as Black, Indigenous, people of color, Latinx, let's say that's 60. Then the percentage of heads of household who identified as BIPOC is 80%. And again, that is an evaluation criteria that is rated in the application. And the same premise under number of households with children under the age of 18. Let's say there are 50. The percentage of households with children under the age of 18 is 50%. So that is again rated in the evaluation. And then we also want to know the total number of children in the project currently. So that's let's see. That is a piece of information that we want in order to be able to understand what kind of impact this assistance has had on the number of children in these properties. So I think that's pretty much all I wanted to go through. It's a very simple spreadsheet. Certain cells are locked where the formulas are. Every data point is asking for documentation, so that should be clear. And jumping over to the supporting data summary tab, that the focus up there on summary table 1 is any anticipated payments to reduce rent arrearages. So you would list those there, and then that number would be carried over into the worksheet. And then summary table 2, COVID-related modifications, again, list all of the separate perhaps invoices that you have, so you come to a total figure. And then that data is used to go back to this application and plug those numbers in. So that is the description of the Excel worksheet. I'm just going to pause for a moment and see if there are any questions on that. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to go back. There's one other thing. I'm going to go back, stop sharing, then share again. I'm going to go over to the certifications. Okay, sorry, I thought I had the certifications pulled up. Okay. Just gonna pause a moment and see if I can get that screen pulled up. And Lauren, can you tell me if you see the screen marked certifications?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this is a form that is uploaded into the Procure Now system, and you will be asked to sign it at the bottom. I've made the font a little bit bigger for the actual certifications so you could see them, but I'll read them too. So you are being asked to certify, and the person signing this form in the first bullet point is asked to certify that as a representative of the entity listed below, that you are authorized to submit an application for this funding for the property listed below. You're asked to certify that the owner entity shown below will take all necessary steps to avoid eviction based solely on non-payment of rent from March 1st to March 31st. You're asked to apply the proceeds from this project, should you be awarded, to any rent in arrears owed by tenants for that period of March through December, and that the tenant accounts be credited with these payments. Within 30 days of receipt of the payment from Washington County, the owner applicant will provide documentation to the county that the funds were used to offset rent arrearages and any modifications, if applicable, for that time period. Within 30 days of receipt of the payment from Washington County, the owner entity will provide documentation to Washington County that tenant accounts were credited with these payments and that the tenants were notified of these credits. You are certifying that you understand and agree that if the funds are not applied as intended, as described in the funding opportunity, that the owner entity will be required to return the funds to Washington County, and that you understand the failure to comply with the certifications could impact future funding opportunities from Washington County. And then finally, just you are required to certify that the information contained in the application packet is true and accurate as submitted. So I will pause there and just see if there are any questions about the certifications. Okay, so I believe, that is really the end of the PowerPoint presentation related to the program, the application. We can pause for just a moment to see if there are any other questions, but then we would be ready to turn this over to Brian Johnson to walk you through Procure Now. So I'm just going to pause for a moment and see if there's any questions for me or the rest of this team. Okay, and Lauren, no hands raised, no chats, no Q&As out there?
Nope.
Okay, great. Okay, then I'm going to turn it over to Brian Johnson.
Hello, everyone. Let me see if I can share my screen. Let's see. Okay, Lauren, can you tell me which screen everyone can see?
Horizons.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, let me put this back over here then. Okay, is it the Procure Now?
Yes.
Okay. So as Jenny mentioned, this application is open now in Procure Now. For those of you that do already have a Procure Now account, you can use the one that you have now. In fact, you can only have one account per email address, so you will need to use the one that you've already set up. If you don't have a Procure Now account, the first time that you use it, when you go on the main landing page for Procure Now, it will ask you to set up an account. It's pretty easy to do. It takes about 30 seconds. You will have to provide some basic information, your name and your email address. You'll get an email sent to whichever email address you use to sign up. And then there will be a link in there to finish setting it up and activating that account. After you have an account and then you go into Procure Now, then you will have access to the link that's provided for this particular application. And once you click on that link or enter it into your address bar, it will bring you up to a page that should look like what you're seeing on my screen now. And just to kind of orient you to what we're looking at here, this is the Procure Now system. This is the specific project for this Coronavirus Relief Fund Rental Economic Relief Program application. Here at the top of the application, there's some information about the release date, the due dates, and the selection dates, and that all stays up to date from us in our office. Then when you're actually ready to submit your application or start filling it out, you'll click on this green button that's labeled draft response. So I'm not going to do that exactly yet. I just want to kind of walk you through what the Procure Now system looks like before we start drafting a response. And as you see, basically all of the material that Jenny just went over with in the presentation is also provided here in the Procure Now system. We have project documents that show the introduction. Again, you can read through that and refer to that, along with contact information. The timeline is also in this introduction section. You click down on to the next bullet number 2. This has the instructions on how to complete the application and some other information in here about interpretations and addenda and some guidelines. And then section 3 will have project details, including eligibility, use of funds, maximum awards, and how ties will be resolved. Section 4 has a few clarifications on the evaluation and award process. And then section 5 actually details how the scoring will be calculated and how your applications will be rated with all the other submissions. So you can see exactly how many points your application will receive depending on how these questions are answered. And then finally, section 6 is where you will begin inputting all of your information specific to this application. You'll just walk through the questions one by one and answer these. You can see that you'll be able to put responses. It's showing a circle with the line through it right now because you have to click on draft response before you can actually enter information. But this is what it will look like once you do that. So you can preview all of this before you actually start drafting your application. And you can see all the questions and the information that is being requested. And then at the bottom, you'll start seeing the required documents. These are some of the forms, Excel sheets, and other information that Jenny was referring to in her presentation. You will actually save those on your computer. And once they're saved, you can just click on it and drag it over to these boxes that have the blue dashes around it. You can drop the file directly into there for each document that's required. This is where the worksheet for that Jenny was, the Excel worksheet that Jenny was walking through. You would put that here. The certification form goes here. The ownership documentation goes here, and the W-9 completed and signed document goes here. So before you start drafting your application, it would be best to go to attachments and download that worksheet that Jenny went through. That's attachment A. You can click on the icons over to the right to download that document. If you need a W-9, you can download a blank one here and fill that out in PDF format. And then the certification form is in attachment C. And in attachment D, there's some frequently asked questions that we've anticipated that you can go into there and maybe find the answer to a question that you may have regarding the program. So all of these documents can also be downloaded from the Downloads tab. You can do them all directly at one time if you go over to the Downloads tab. If there's any addenda or notices, that will be listed under this tab. And finally, the question and answers. This is where the system can gather questions that all of the users, applicants have in one place. Then the answers will be responded to as they're submitted. And then anybody else would be available to see those as well. So I'm just going to pause right now to see if there's any quick questions before I move on. And really that's kind of all there is to it, other than you click draft response and then you'll have to log in, which I can't do from my account because I'm an administrator for this, but you would be able to click log in here. And then once you're in there, it's just going to look exactly like it does now, except that you'll actually be able to submit it. And there's a button at the bottom of the application once you've completed for you to hit submit. It will show that any documents that are or questions that are required to be answered. If you didn't answer them, then it will give you a notice that there's information missing. So you can go back and make corrections or additions as you need to. And then once everything is completed, you'll hit submit, and then that will be it. Are there any questions on that? Or Susie, did you want to add anything that I might have overlooked?
Brian, we have a, go ahead.
I think you covered it, everything, Brian. Just a final warning, the system does cut everything off at the time and date that we have put on there. So on December 18th at 5 o'clock, the system will shut down. So I encourage you all to apply as soon as possible, or at least the day before, because if you have some type of internet malfunction or whatever, the system doesn't recognize that. It's either on time or it's late. The same with questions. If questions have closed and there was really something pressing, my contact information is on there, so you can contact me. But for the most part, please try and get your questions in as soon as possible.
And I do want to just bring up the question in the chat. It looks like Jenny answered it, but just so everyone is aware, the question was, does each property have to have a separate login for Procure Now, or can you have numerous applications for properties with the same login?
Yeah, I did not answer that correctly. So Brian, why don't you answer that?
Well, I think Susie might be better equipped to answer that one, because I'm not sure if you have to have a separate login for each application or if you can have multiple applications under the same login.
So you cannot, you can only answer the submission once. So it's kind of up to you guys. If you want to allow multiple applications, then they would just upload those applications all at the same time. Which kind of makes sense because the backup information is going to be the same for some of it. So they might upload 2 or 3 worksheets to that portal.
Correct. You can drag as many files into these submittal boxes as needed. So if you have 3 properties, you would do 3 worksheets and you would put all 3 of them into this box here.
And if that's something that you guys are going to allow, we could add a question that says, how many properties are you applying for, or how many projects?
That Susie, but the questions in the application format need to be for each individual project. So I'm wondering if we should talk offline about that question and then respond via Procure Now.
Probably a good idea.
I think we need, that's a great question. So thank you, Melinda, for asking that. So yeah, we will figure that out.
Okay, any other questions in the chat, Lauren?
I have a quick question. I didn't write down the chat. So we have several properties. Some right now are eligible for OHCS funding. We haven't received like next steps yet, but you know, they are eligible for it. For those properties, since OHCS will cover the rent arrears, can we apply for like modification or delayed maintenance, or do we have to, you know, apply, or are those not eligible?
The only way you could apply for the modifications is if you were submitting an application for the rental arrearages.
As well. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, there's another question from Will. Does the owner of the property need to submit the application, or can the property management submit?
The owner needs to submit the application. I see that I see that question in the chat from Charlene about if we have a board, do we need a board resolution to send the application? And the answer is no. That on that certification sheet, the first bullet point had to do with that person is authorized to submit the application. And we did that because we knew that there really wouldn't be time for organizations to obtain that given the tight timelines.
Thank you.
One thing I did want to add, and this is probably self-explanatory to all of you that submit applications, but your application needs to be complete as submitted. So, you know, no kind of missing documents. So you really want to go through that list of required documents and make sure that every one of them is uploaded before you submit.
And along those lines, Jenny, until the deadline, you can withdraw your submittal, add something or change something, and then resubmit it. So if you have an outstanding question, you may want to go ahead and just submit, and then when you get your answer, withdraw and make that change or whatever if necessary. But again, I encourage people not to wait till the last minute to upload those.
That's great. Yeah, in the FAQs that we did a list of FAQs in the beginning that were sort of the initial set, and they are uploaded into the system for you to look at. Any future questions obviously are through Procure Now, but that was something that we addressed in there as well. And I guess specifically related to technological difficulties that, you know, we know that happens at times and systems get overloaded. So the sooner you kind of navigate the system and get your application submittal, the less risk you have of having difficulties that would preclude you being able to submit by 5 o'clock next Friday. Okay, well, I think unless there are any remaining questions, we'll just pause another couple of seconds. We again just really appreciate your time today and appreciate the pressure we're putting you under to get to meet that deadline of next Friday. But we just really didn't want to miss this opportunity to assist in some way to help you, and most especially to help the tenants in Washington County. So thank you.
And remember, if you guys have any questions you think of later, you can also email us. Our email was up on the screen earlier, but it's CDBG.
No, Lauren.
No?
Any
You don't,
questions?
Susie, you said you
Answer
love
them through
questions.
Procure. I know, and bring them on, but bring them on through Procure Now. That way they get answered in Procure Now and everybody sees the question and everybody gets the answer.
Okay.
Because
So
if you
do
have a
through
question,
Procure
someone
Now.
else probably has a similar question.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Hey, Jenny, do you guys want to jump on a Teams meeting real quick to discuss the multiples, or do you want to wait on that?
Yeah, no, I think we need to dive into that right away. So yeah,
Okay, I'll call you back.
okay. All right. Thank you, everyone.